To the program. For sheer convenience, there's a lot to be said for the increasingly cashless society we're becoming. But there is a dark side. Over the past 5 years, according to the Reserve Bank, the use of cheques has fallen to just 3% of non-cash payments, while electronic payments have risen 35%, averaging 200 transactions for every Australian, and so creating a haven for cybercrime. Credit card fraud last year totalled close to $150 million. The Federal Police Commissioner has called for greater cooperation between police agencies, governments and businesses around the world to confront a problem the AFP says is now far bigger than traditional crime. Law enforcement agencies concede they're facing a serious new high-tech challenge and certainly don't have all the answers. Business editor Greg Hoy reports.
I think it's fair enough to say that the overall risk to the Australian economy is probably in the billions.
It is the crime of the century: e-crime, electronic theft, daylight robbery.
The amount of crime taking place in the cyber world is much more greater than what we are seeing now in the real world, based on the fact there's less chance of detection.
When I talk about e-crime, we shouldn't just limit ourselves to banking. But certainly in banking, what we see is ongoing pressures in relation to credit card skimming, debit card skimming. We have online attacks, obviously, in terms of internet banking.
It's big enough to make the most audacious armed robbery seem positively prehistoric. Today's thieves leave no smoking gun, few fingerprints, and aided and abetted by the World Wide Web, they know no borders. This Eastern European cyber gang is now wanted by the FBI after getting away with $70 million from medium-sized American companies, councils, even churches. Such gangs can and do strike anywhere in the world, including Australia.
It seems primarily to be coming out of Eastern Europe, but what we are seeing, which is positive, is more cooperation from Russian authorities particularly in relation to bringing these perpetrators to justice.
They can be international and they can be local. The common feature they display, I suppose, is they can be anonymous. They can compromise other people's computers, other people's logins. The funds invariably go overseas.
Norcom Technologies advises leading financial institutions on the use of cyber technologies to track and counterattack cyber criminals attempting card or online banking fraud.
With this type of tool, we can see here that a particular fraudster in the middle here is making multiple payments out to other money mule accounts or other fraudsters and follow the money. This is a good tool to identify really well-run organised crime syndicates. And this is crucial in reducing fraud losses.
Like another gang of 19 hackers intercepted last week in Britain and the US. Those on the FBI's wanted list used so-called malicious software, a Trojan virus called Zeus carried by innocent-looking emails, which infect computers, capturing passwords, account numbers, etc. to log into online banking accounts.
What scares me greatly is the prolific use of Trojans now, and one well-known one in the anti-fraud industry is one called Zeus. And Zeus is particularly scary because traditional means of fighting online fraud, such as putting in virus protection software, does not necessarily stop all forms of Zeus.
The hackers skimming thousands of dollars into accounts set up by so-called money mules, often students who are paid a commission to then transfer stolen funds out of the country.
It is something the younger people in particular need to be aware of when they get recruited by these people.
You'll find that mule advertisements will go into the press quite regularly. The AFP is working with the banks as we speak in relation to a muling investigation.
The big four Australian banks say they are on top of the problem, though only one agreed to be interviewed.
My teams work 24/7 to analyse transactions that may be suspect of fraud.
So they're looking at transaction patterns and they're looking at fraud patterns both here locally in Australia and around the world to predict what's going to come next, what's going to hit Australia next.
Some banks have sent customers a security gadget like this to issue a new password for each online transaction. Others send text messages to mobile phones to check it's actually the customer who's accessing their accounts.
We contact our customers every day to query transactions on their credit cards. We've invested significantly in the last 6 months in anti-skimming technology on our ATMs, and we're continuing to invest in new fraud prevention systems for our customers.
One very popular sting is called phishing.
Fraudsters are sending fraudulent emails pretending to be from a bank, for example. That email is coercing the consumer into either inputting personal details, such as internet banking login details or password information.
Scammers are becoming a little bit more sophisticated. They are targeting their individuals that they are going to. They're able to obtain a fair amount of personal information about individuals by simple things, by going to content service provider pages and finding out names, dates of birth, interests, etc.
For us, we get 10 to 15 phishing events targeting Commonwealth Bank customers each month, and that's very, very low by global standards.
Credit card fraud, meantime, has morphed into a wholesale business.
There is a number of underground forums where people can go online and actually purchase credit cards. They can purchase the expiry date, they can purchase the name of the individual card owner. Now, the reason they've actually obtained these informations is through things such as skimming, where they've skimmed the personal details of the individual, and then they go on the black market and sell those online.
The Australian Payments Clearing Association, like the banks, is quick to claim that card fraud is minor, emphasising 33 cents is lost in every $1,000 turned over. Sounds insignificant. Only later is it mentioned $171 million was stolen last year alone. So what are the figures for online banking?
They're not gathered and published. For us, our online banking losses are the lowest of any of the fraud categories we measure in the Commonwealth Bank. It would be fractions of cents per $1,000 transacted.
Measured like that, armed robbery would never rate a mention. But in the UK, banks are required by law to report online losses, the equivalent last year of almost $100 million. To confront credit and debit card fraud, back in 2006, Britain began rolling out PIN code-enabled smart cards with computer chips for extra security. Technology still being rolled out for Australian credit cards, and the Bankers Association says the rollout for debit cards won't begin until next year. Not surprisingly, there's been a flurry of fraudulent activity on the debit card front, and despite 42 arrests this year, the problem is getting worse.
At this stage, we've experienced significant FPOS manipulation in Victoria, West Australia, New South Wales, Queensland. I can't get down to specific nationalities because there are some ongoing investigations that may be jeopardised in relation to that. But I can say they organise themselves and train in regions which would include North America, Southeast Asia and Eastern Europe.
Under the Electronic Funds Transfer Code, customers are not liable for fraud losses, provided, of course, they detect them.
A number of people out there become very blasé in relation to checking their accounts. I know I'm forever at my own family members to ensure that they check their accounts as they come through and certainly report any irregularities.
In the end, it's a rallying call for greater vigilance from consumers, from business and police.
Ensure that you actually have the right type of antivirus software embedded in your computer, and you actually really take careful consideration before you're opening an email. Banks don't send you emails considering and asking for your personal details. The Australian Taxation Office doesn't do the same. So people need to be cautious, they need to be careful, and they need to make sure they look after their own protection.
Business Editor Greg Hoy.